Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversationality, a bi-weekly live stream that we do here at Optionality, where we talk about what's going on in the world of work and the now of work, as we call it, and often have guests who have really interesting lives and insights to share. Optionality, if you don't know, is a community for those of us who are interested in exploring, seeking to improve our optionality-driven lives, and kind of understand that having a single W-2 job may not be the full answer anymore to stability and security. And we all want to sort of keep our options open and have more options for our full life, not just a singular path. And so we're all about exploring that. And today I'm joined by Catherine Gray, who I've known Catherine for, I don't even know, must be almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And Catherine and I talk about a lot of different things. She is extremely well versed in many of the same areas in which I am interested: technology, politics, startups, all sorts of things. And as I was saying when I was sharing that we were having this conversation, I thought of Catherine for this conversation we're going to have today, because we're getting ready for 2026. And part of getting ready for 2026 is asking yourself, what do you want 2026? What do you want that to be the year of for yourself? Fill in the blank for you. And there's two parts of that question, really, which is like, how do you know when it's time that you need to take some action, do something different, find something, figure out what works and what doesn't, and move towards what works. But the second part that's sometimes hard is, how do you know what you really want? How do you know now's the time? How do you know, what are these, how do you separate the signal from the noise on your own path, on your own life? And how do you know how to listen to that and make the move? And I look at Catherine's career, and she has sort of her constellation of skills, I perceive, as being really consistently around communications and product development and management and content, all in there. But she has applied them, for, again, outside looking in, to me, she has applied them in many different kinds of ways. Companies big, companies small, working for herself, even getting into politics and political campaigning. And so I really wanted to talk to Catherine about, how did she make those big leaps and small steps? And how did she learn how to listen to the own signal amongst all the noise of how we tell ourselves what we ought to be doing? And so, Catherine, thank you so much for wanting to join us in this conversation.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate that. And it's kind of fun at this stage to have that recognized. But you and I, we've probably had conversations that I've never had with anybody else. Often you're my first phone call when something big happens in the world or something big happens with work. So I've always appreciated your counsel and what you reflect back. So thank you. It's flattering to know that it comes across as interesting, maybe not always strategic. Sometimes I'm merely responding to what's going on in the world, and but it's worked. So yeah, I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah. Well, you bring up something interesting that I was just reading an article about, and I posted this article in the optionality community about, it's okay not to love your job, and it's okay if your main purpose and meaning isn't found in your main job. And their point was, they were talking about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, and implying that we have to do our main work for our livelihood out of some intrinsic motivation about purpose and meaning. And I think that's a very common message we get, is maybe not acknowledging, sometimes there is extrinsic motivation. You need the money, you need this, you need that. And so not every leap or even baby step is strategic. And some of them really are driven by outside contributions. So,
yeah.
So I wanted to go, people who've seen me interview other people know I always ask about, I love a good origin story. And I was really curious how you were raised to think about your work and career. What did your parents do? And do you think it shaped your own preconceptions about what you would go out and do in the world? And has it changed over time? Did you kind of realize, oh, I was raised this way. That's just not how my life is working. Or, because I know I was really raised to think, once my mom went back to work in the
Mhm.
70s, like when I was a kid. Then I saw her climb the corporate ladder. I just assumed that was what I was going to do. And
Mhm.
I did try to do that for about the first, I don't know, 10 years of my career before I was like, I do not want to do this anymore. So, how were you raised and what did you observe in your own family?
Well, my everyone in my family worked. The women worked, my grandmothers worked, like, no one ever didn't work. Like, I even remember my grandmother being quite old and still working,
Mm.
and my parents were journalists. They actually met in the newsroom in the '60s.
Wow.
Yeah, and, in fact, my mother has been a working journalist up until 2 years ago, like, she finally retired in her 80s. And my father was, he was also a political cartoonist, and so he left the newsroom, did some political cartooning, and then went to and worked for, the state, and he was in PR for, like, public information. But all of them almost all of them, I should say, were very focused on stability. Like,
Yeah.
we're not that far removed from the farm. And like my grandparents grew up on a farm here locally in Oregon, and um and then also not that far off from the depression. Like, and my parents were a little older. So there was a lot of emphasis on skill building, and like journalism sounds really sexy. It really wasn't sexy until the '70s, like,
All the
and
president's men.
exactly, exactly, with Watergate. It was a trade. I mean, they were literally paid weekly. Like, it was not, you didn't have to have a college degree. Like, my mom did, but my father didn't.
Huh.
And it was the kind of job that you got when you had, some talent and some education, but nobody was living on the farm anymore. Everyone was in the city, and it was either this or manufacturing. I mean, that's not how they would tell the story, I don't think, but like when I connect the dots, that's what I see. And so there was a lot of emphasis on getting good grades and getting a job, and it was fine if it was something related to your talents, your interests, but it wasn't like there was no whimsy encouraged. Like, it was and it wasn't discouraged either. But I was, kind of like you, like, I was a theater kid to start out, and and then eventually, like, I realized, like, I wasn't going to be the most talented. I wasn't a singer, I wasn't a dancer. And I read some quote from a very famous actress who said, if there's anything you could possibly do other than acting, you should do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I was always going to be more like, backstage running the show anyway. So eventually at some point, like, I think my mother was just like, you're going to do what you want regardless of what I say. So, just graduate and get on with it. My father was always a little bit more worried about me. He thought that what I was doing was taking these enormous risks, when
Mm.
basically I was just, working for myself, which he just worried about me constantly. So there was this tension between, you know, building for stability, making sure that, you weren't in too much debt, and that, but they also said, yeah, you should like what you do, like, and you have skills and talent, so we'll encourage you to do that. There is, like, one wild card in, that I grew up with, which was my grandfather, my mother's father, who, again, grew up on the farm. There were too many kids, had to go to the city. He worked in when he was very young and had a young family, he was gravely injured in a sawmill accident. And in those days, you were taken care of by the company, like the hospital was run by the company and all that. And the story's a little murky, but the what happened was it wasn't clear that they were interested in keeping him alive. And if anything's going to radicalize somebody who, values stability, it's going to be that. It's going to be like, they almost murdered him. So he became a union organizer, which again was really risky at the time. And, then, they built, we know how that works in the United States, where you built laws, and, eventually that became like the stability that we all depend on. But there was, a certain amount of, you stand up for it when it's really, really, really important. But in general, the message that I got was, you'll work hard, and you won't take too many risks.
Wow. Are you a John Sayles fan at all, the film director?
I don't know that person. No.
You need to look up a film called Meituan. It's actually about union organizing in coal mines, I believe.
Mm,
But yeah, your grandfather's story just reminded me so much of why unions were formed in the first place,
yeah.
because of what was how companies were chewing people up and spitting them out,
Yeah.
without regulation.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
so okay, so give us, I don't want like a chronological, oh, what job did you do, then what job did you do, but just give us the kind of mind map of the kinds of roles and status and industries and company stages. Like, how many different kind of environments have you worked in over, say, the 20 years of your career, let's say?
Um, uh, when it comes to like marketing, like I started in advertising and definitely like moved more into marketing, and now I'm in tech marketing. All different stages, and all different angles. So I've been in like early stage, have some funding, startups, but like they're kind of going, they've got a product and they're going somewhere. I've been in just barely got some investors to pay attention, have absolutely no product market fit, and we're trying to get there,
Yeah.
to public companies that are at the top of their sector. And I did hear from somebody recently who said, you should pick one and just like focus there. And I was just like, the thing is that if you pick one and then the market changes and then you're known for this one thing,
Mm,
and I've just never really found a lot of value in that. And it's not that I know you called me a chameleon. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And I mean, and there's some truth to that, in that I would say that the through line is that I kind of look for where things are going and if I want to go there. Does that
mm,
look like fun? Is that like an emerging path that I want to have, like I want to put my mark on, or do I have something to contribute to the people who are building that? If yes, I'll go there. And if the things align. There have been some that I've gone down and looked at, and it's like, I want to go there. Like when I first met you, when you guys were building Blog Her, I was super interested in this whole new world where
yeah,
women could make money from home writing about their lives. I was
yeah.
like, what's going on there? And so I looked at that, and I went to some of the early bloggers. I was like, you know what? That isn't for me. That isn't what I want to do. But I like what the people who are building Blog Her are doing. Like, I like watching what the business model is about and
Mm,
how is that going to form. So and I was like, and also I'm going to be the cheerleader. I'm not going to join that. I'm probably just going to be the market. I'm going to help support it by being one of the readers and cheering you all on. So I've just looked at, like, what's emerging, what's changing, what's exciting, what hasn't yet been built, and
mm.
where can I contribute.
So, and when you were making all these changes, and I really like your comment about, people want you to be a specialist or they want you to be niche, but how often have we seen a niche just kind of not be needed anymore, or a specialty become outdated? And I think we're at ever more risk of that, especially because it's really hard to predict with AI innovation. Like, where are they going to innovate people out of a job next? Like,
Yeah.
how do you know? So when you were changing around from early, because the way you describe it, it seems like, oh, you would always be in early startups because you want to be like where the puck is going, as Wayne Gretzky would say. But
Right.
you also spent quite a bit of time at, like you said, public companies and people who are already leading sectors.
Hmm.
So how much would you say you really spent time planning your next step, like strategically, here's where I want to go? Or how much was it that opportunity arose and you decided which risks to take, which leaps to take?
Hmm.
And it was kind of driven by things come. I used to say my career was like, oh, things are floating down the river, lily pads or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I want to hop on that one. And like, it could have been any of them, but I was like, oh, that one, I'm going to go for that one. And it wasn't like I went out and built lily pads for me to jump on. Right. And so I'm
Right.
wondering, when you made all these changes, um, was there a strategy around it, or was it really just like, let me pick the next interesting thing that intrigues me? And was it driven, getting to that intrinsic and extrinsic? Like, how often did you have to figure out what was next because something happened to you, versus you being somewhere and saying, I want to happen to me and be somewhere else?
Yeah, that's a great question. There have been, so early on, I did a thing that I didn't think I would ever do, which was run a business. So someone that I had worked with before, we were both quite young. I think we were too young to know what we were doing, and that was a good thing, because we didn't know how badly it could go, and it ended up going great. We worked in a video post production house, and she was the creative designer, and I was the writer business person. And it was after the dot-com bomb, whatever we call that now, the bubble burst. And we
Yeah.
had a story, we were young, and we had a story that there were no jobs to be had. And really, it was more like, when I'm really honest, looking back, is like, I just didn't want any of those jobs. I'd also, like, I'd had my feelings hurt. I thought I was going to go into PR, and because I had this journalism degree, and I was living in Portland, and there was, like, my options for journalism or television, I didn't really like them. It was going to be really commercial, or they're just, it also looked like journalism was dying. And so this internet thing looked cool, even though everyone said it was not. And we're like, yeah, but I think that there could be a way that with our skill set, we could go and help these tech companies that seem to be emerging. Like, what can we do there? And so we put together this, cute little agency, had a cute little name, and people sort of patted us on the head and said, yeah, let's, maybe you could do that. And we were both super fierce. And who runs marketing in those emerging tech companies? It was smart women. And so we came in, and we had this all women team, which was sort of unusual. And we never lost. I think we lost a pitch once in 5 years, and it was for business we didn't really want in the end anyway. So we built this mostly because we said, what have we got to lose? There are no other jobs out there, so let's just make our own. So that was a time where there was some things going on in the world, and we were kind of we felt like we were making the best of a situation. Like, it wasn't that bad. And the truth is I didn't want any of the jobs out there. And then there have been times when, like, stuff has happened. So I worked at a company where I joined, and 6 months later they were getting acquired, which was a little sooner than I expected. And it was going to require a move. It was a very, very small company, and they were going to get bought by a gigantic company, and it was basically an acqui-hire. And so we were all going to have to move. And I was like, that's not going to work for me. And so I got a bucket of money, and it was campaign season, like you referred to. And I said, okay, well, I'll go and volunteer. And this candidate was the underdog and had a terrible script for raising money. And so I just offered, I said, can I fix your script? And they're like, do you want a job? And I was like, no. And then I met the campaign manager, and I ended up, like, actually taking a job for the rest of the season. And, and then there have been times, and this was, you and I talked about this a lot. This was a little over a year ago, where I had been at another really early stage startup that just was not finding their market. And so that job ended. I took some time off, got my kid to school, and then it was, fall of 2024, and everyone was holding their breath. And I had some ideas about what I might want to do, but I looked around and I said, nobody knows what's going to happen in the next year. Like, if there's any time for me to make a conservative choice, like, this would be the time. And I ended up getting super lucky in that a company that I had been talking to a couple of years before I was sort of an opportunistic hire. And then it turned out that, like, what I thought was going to be kind of a sleepy job ended up being really great. And I'm getting to, do things that no one's ever done at this company before. So it just, it was a little bit of right place, right time, working my network, and jumping at something, even though I didn't think it was going to be perfect, I was able to shape it so that it was a little bit more meaningful for me.
Well, I think you say two things that I always, when I'm talking to, say, my nephews who are, young in their careers or just getting out of college, I'm like, every job I ever got was partly network, partly timing and luck, and then partly being willing to, like, go all in. It's just, I just think the traditional, what people consider the traditional job search method, has that, I don't really know a lot of people that that's how they got all their jobs.
I
Like
don't
you see a
yeah.
job listing and you submit your information and they call you in and you do, like, I just, most people I know, there is some other element that's coming in. And of course, in order to be in the right place at the right time, sometimes you got to get out there and put yourself in places.
Mhm.
You've got to like, so it's so interesting. Like you say, you were willing to volunteer for that political campaign. And then they're like, oh, but, do you want a job? Something I found really that you tossed off like it was nothing, but I think is really hard for people is this idea of skills mapping, this idea of saying, this is, I have not done this before, but my skills apply to this. Here's how I would make this, here's how I would make my skills contribute to the very different things you've done.
Mhm.
Like, where's the font of that kind of thinking about your own skills and contribution in a flexible kind of way? Where's the source of wellspring of that for you?
Um, I this is another one of those things I had to have reflected back to me at one point because I didn't know that everybody didn't do that.
Mm,
I think I had, my business partner, she's 'cause I we were talking about, like, how do we know what like, it turns out we're good at this thing that everyone told us we couldn't do. Why are we good at it? Because we were kind of like we were a little surprised we were successful.
yeah.
And when she was an amazing designer and just, like, truly, truly talented, and what she said about it, she goes, "It's your reporter brain, you just ask the questions."
Uh,
And so I just ask a ton of questions until I've got enough of the picture that I know what to do next. And if I don't know what to do next, I don't care. I'll go find somebody else who knows what to do next. Like, sometimes it's just like a matter of knowing, like, well, if I can't do this, who do I bring in to make it happen? Because I don't I don't really care about being the person that gets all the credit. I want the thing that we've all committed to be successful. And so if I and I'm not particularly worried about um I think it's hard to look dumb if you're asking good questions. Like,
yeah.
people respect that.
Yes.
And there have been times where I've taken on something where, like, ooh, this, like, requires, like, actual skills. I know that there are people who could do this better than I can, but I really want to learn how. And this seems like a relatively low risk time. So if I'm honest about what I can do and I work really hard, there were times where, like, I would stay up all night working on something I've never done before. And it was okay. No one was going to teach me how to do things. So I was just going to have to commit to learning it. So I guess it's just a matter of, like, asking questions, being able to connect dots, and then, putting in the work when you've got some skill building to do.
I think that is it's a really useful formula for life in general, because I have
Mhm,
definitely found this to be true. First, to say, to learn that you can learn. When
mhm,
I was a theater kid who went on to try to be a theater adult and, like, decided at the age of 25, like, I was not going to pursue this as my full-time thing anymore, and that I wanted to actually have money in my life. Like, I was really like, oh, I so want to, like, be able to afford to do things. And I got a job in the commodities industry working for a commodities trader, which I literally knew zero about. It was a friend of the family, and he
mhm,
just needed a trading assistant.
mhm.
And, it's the Mr. Rogers, find the helpers.
Yeah.
People love to talk about what they do and they love to share their expertise, really,
Mhm,
to learn that you can learn, that if
mhm,
you find that helper. And then I went on to go into tech, about which I knew nothing either. And in
mhm.
each place I was, I found the engineers who just, no one ever was coming to their cubicle to find out the nitty gritty of what they worked on, but they love it. They're excited about it, and they can't believe that they get to, like, whiteboard for you for like an hour, and it can make such a difference. Find the helpers, learn that you can learn, and then you can take that to, you can learn to learn in a lot of different environments. I mean, I'm not talking about neurosurgery, but
Right.
when it comes to learning a technology or learning about, a business, making a business plan. I helped the VP of marketing at my first tech company write his marketing plan for the year. And he just gave me big chunks of it to, like, work on and do.
Mhm.
He had no reason to think other than he just thought I could learn. I was generally smart. And so I think that that's such an important formula to know that you can learn, to find the people who are interested and excited to help you learn, and
Mhm.
then to try things and to like work hard at them.
Mhm.
It's so true. You articulated that really well. What's the most impulsive decision you ever made to change what you were doing and go do something else?
Um, well, I am not impulsive.
Okay.
Um, I I will take risks, but I'm usually doing it with my eyes wide open. And then, like I said, like I've said a few times, like what feels risky for me is probably not a risk for someone else. But
Well,
just
when you went into business for yourself with that partner, are you
Mhm.
saying that you wrote out a whole 5-year strategic plan and you explored the competitive landscape and you, or did you just think that you guys worked well together and could see there was a gap in the market you could fill and say, let's try this for a while? Because I
We
would
weren't
consider
even
that,
sure we worked well together.
oh,
We
wow.
were not friends. Like we were colleagues who went, "Well, I really like what you do, and you really like we had
Sounds
mutual
impulsive to
admiration."
me, Catherine. Sounds impulsive. What is not, why do you not think of that as an impulsive decision you made?
Because I think because like I said, like there were external factors that made it look like the world was coming to an end right when we were getting our
Yeah.
career started. And so we were doing something no one expected us to do. I think that's why it wasn't impulsive. We actually did give ourselves some stage gates. We are like, okay, so we'll do this for this long, but if we haven't landed this much business by this time, we're going to have to do something else. And then we kept
Yeah.
succeeding. But I mean, I think that I mean, this is a little impulsive, mostly because like I told myself like this makes absolutely no sense and I don't really care. So after working for a big public company for 3 or 4 years, and really liking that, and then also seeing where and and I was working in a piece of it, an acquisition product that was poorly understood by the rest of the company, and so that worked for me, and that I could connect some dots. But like when when it was time to move from there, I had a bunch of different options, and I was sort of annoyed with myself because I realized that one, I was really lucky, but none of these were apples to apples. Like they weren't all similar. And so I was really going to have to make some hard decisions about what I was doing. And I ended up going with the pre-Series A startup with tech that I actually could already see what was going to be wrong with it, like and what changes they were going to have to agree to make.
So why,
And
so why did you do it if it was, if
because
it,
I've been bored.
uh,
I mean, honestly, like when I make some big changes, it's either because something has become intolerable, and it's like it's just not going to work. I can't contribute and I'm not growing, or I get bored. And
you're
I just
dangerous when you're bored, huh?
yeah. And and this was time was like, well, I have all these skills now. I'm confident in my skills. Can I apply them in an environment where there's absolutely no infrastructure? Can I do that? And I learned what works and when you're not the CEO, where your limits are.
Yeah.
Mhm.
My last question, we've had a lot of conversation here about work as sort of this standalone thing. And I found it very interesting. There was a new Lean In McKinsey survey released this week about women in the workplace. They've been doing it probably for 10 years now since Lean In was published. And it's kind of a depressing report about women just reporting less support and therefore less ambition because I think they're trying to tie it back to there's less belief that their ambition will pay off. And someone
Mhm.
brought up a really interesting point that nowhere in this long report did it mention anything about childcare, caregiving, any kind of life issues, and how that might. I haven't read it myself, so this is just a note to me to go check that out. But
Mhm.
in all the conversation we've had, we haven't talked about have any of your transitions and um, decisions to make changes, whether impulsive or not,
Mhm.
how many of them were any of them driven by what was happening outside your workplace? Because of course, for us, optionality means optionality to take care of our life responsibilities, optionality to have that of the many irons in the fire. Some of them are not about the workplace.
Right.
So how often did that play in where you're like, this is for my life right now? I
Yeah.
need to make this change.
Yeah. Huge. And we haven't touched on that. I have two daughters and they're grown now. Um, but the agency that my partner and I worked on together, um, when I had my first kid in the middle of all of that, which I did not know anybody who had done that. Somebody who started a company, a woman who started a company, had a thriving company, then had a baby in the middle of it. It's usually they have a baby and then they start their own thing. And
Yeah.
so I was like looking for people to help me with that. And I couldn't find anyone who'd done it before, but I got a really great group of people to help me navigate that. And then by the time I had my second, that we realized that the purpose of our agency had sort of like the market had changed enough that we were going to have to make huge changes in our business model, and neither of us were up for that. And so what we did is we found jobs for all of our staff. They mostly went to work for our clients, and we stayed partners for another year. So I had the baby and the second baby, and then she went off to go and do something else. She wanted to go back to making movies. And then I became independent. And then I had other partners who were often, women who were, trying to, work for themselves. And I did that for a few years. So it was, a smaller projects, smaller life, but that was actually where I did a lot of my skill building as well.
Mhm.
It's like, because I wasn't running big projects, I could focus my skills. And so that was, me kind of looking like, well, what's possible right now? How do I stay in the game and be relevant and sort of take advantage of like, what can I make out of this very narrow time of my life? And then by the time my youngest was going to kindergarten, one of those clients that I had hired me. And so then I was, back, working for other companies. And then I vacillated between inside software companies and then working at agencies. And so for most of the time my kids were young, that's what I did is I worked for other people because it just created some, like, I know like how much hustle is involved in either being responsible for your own paycheck or being responsible for other people's
Yeah.
paychecks. Like, it's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
And I was very happy to have that part taken care of so
Yeah.
that I could, one, have space for whatever comes up with kids, because there's always something, and then to take some other risks within the container of, another company.
That makes total sense. And it's so true that people think working for yourself is the most flexible, but it's also, I think, more pressure.
Yeah,
And I also
you're
think that's
always working.
such a great point about using the time when things were a little smaller and a little less hustly to like skills build.
Mhm.
Have you read Work, Pause, Thrive by Lisa Stromberg?
Mm-mm.
Um, people perceive that women leave the workforce when they have kids, and there are different perceptions about why. For some, some people will certainly talk about the social ramifications of not having subsidized childcare and how it
Yeah.
begins to not make sense to invest in, childcare when you could have someone stay home. And there are people who will talk about, the emotional pull of it. But she was saying, actually, we're kind of wrong to think that women just are either in the workforce or out of the workforce, that lots of people take a pause, and it doesn't necessarily mean they disconnect altogether. It means they pull back a lot. It means they do smaller stuff. It means they keep their hands in other ways. But
Mhm.
she interviewed a lot of people for that book and found that a lot of people were sort of, they changed how they worked or what they did, but including all the women that you talked about in Blog Her,
Yeah.
who, worked at home by writing about their lives and made money from that. And,
Mhm.
so they were keeping their hand in, they were developing skills. I know so many of those women who have like jobs out in
Yeah.
companies now that leverage the skills they developed all on their own being a
Yeah.
blogger. So it was a huge gateway to so many other. I was just say blogging was a gateway drug of technology. Like once you started having to use HTML, you figured out other stuff, but it was
Yeah.
also a gateway to other kinds of livelihoods.
Yes. So many of them. Yeah. Like there's one just recently, I was thinking about like what an amazing writer she is, um, good communicator, and she's got like a director of like operations inside of a tech company, which is not something that I would necessarily have thought she was going to do 20 years ago, but like I know the progression of her career. And
Yeah.
so I was like, that's perfect. And it's perfect for where she wants to be in life now. And
Yeah.
it was because of that exposure to technology and understanding how things work.
Yeah. Cool. So, Catherine, I always close by saying, how can people support your work, or where can they follow your work, or where can they find you?
Oh, yeah, that's right. You told me you were going to say that. So, yeah, my work is a little invisible at the moment because I'm, as they say, in between launches. But the company I work for right now is called Tempo, and it's in the work management space. I don't post a lot to LinkedIn these days, but I will probably be supporting my product managers as we get closer to this launch in the spring.
Okay, awesome. Repeat the company name. I'll put the link in the show notes.
Oh, tempo.io.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Catherine. Thank you for being our last conversationality of the
Oh,
year.
that's right. Yeah.
And so to everyone out there, come and check us out at optionality.life. We have a public membership where you can, read or listen to or watch this kind of content at no cost. And then we have a premium membership where we do all sorts of interesting convenings, working groups, sprints, in addition to community and just having conversation about all of these complexities about getting the life and the work that you want and balancing all your responsibilities and your interests. And yes, some purpose and meaning in there too. So happy holidays, everyone.